It says going live. We're live, and I need to just mute the other thing. That'll mute in a moment. But hello, everyone. Welcome to Sharing Shakespeare with Shakespeare Link. This is, I think, episode 4, maybe. And we are joined this week by the amazing Evelyn O'Malley, who is here to talk to us. And we're going to just chat for an hour or so until 8 o'clock. You will be able to ask us questions throughout if you want to put them in the YouTube chat. I'll do my best to answer all of them. But let's begin just our lovely Monday night chat. So this is Evelyn O'Malley. Evelyn trained at Arts Ed and worked for the British Shakespeare Company and Chapter House, and then went on to Exeter University to do a PhD. Research at Exeter concerns contemporary Shakespeare performed in the weather, and has also worked with climate scientists and meteorologists as part of the Climate Stories project. So welcome, Evelyn. You can talk now.
Hi.
Slightly listening.
Yeah, it's strange that there are people listening, but yeah, we see each other. So yeah. We'll get used to that. We'll try and forget about it. Or
we're just having a chat.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Grand, thank you. Yeah, nice cup of tea. Wishing I was at the Willow Globe.
Oh yeah.
Sitting outside. I've got some sunlight just coming in through this window, so that's nice. But yeah, it would be really nice to be in Wales, sitting outside.
Everyone's missing the Willow right now, so but we can chat about it. We can talk about it and transport ourselves there. So I promised you we'd start up with some warm-up questions. So well, actually, it might sound a bit deep, but what was your kind of journey into Shakespeare? Like, when did you first get the bug? If you did get the bug, maybe you hate Shakespeare.
No. It was my 10th birthday, and it's hard to know whether or how we like create these myths like retrospectively. But my dad brought me and some of my friends to see Footsbarn. It was the travelling theatre company, and they were doing a Midsummer Night's Dream in the Ivy Gardens, which is in a place in the RDS just outside of, or in Dublin. So I went with my friends, and we brought cushions to sit on, and it was kind of in a tent but slightly outside, and all different European languages, so it wasn't all in English, and there were aerial artists, and Puck was on a trapeze and giant flowers, and I think that at that point I remember, oh my goodness, this is kind of like the world, or just something about it grabbed me, and always I was like, I want to be part of this. I want to live with them in their caravans and run away in their caravans and learn to speak languages like this, and do and make theatre like this. So yeah, I guess I always had that as a dream. And then growing up, loved Shakespeare at school, went to see things when I could. Always loved outdoor stuff. If there was an outdoor performance, something about the kind of relaxed space of it, and feeling really comfortable, and the magic. I know magic is such an overused word, but the magic of being outside at night and at dark, and growing up, and that was always really special to me. So when I graduated from Arts Ed and got a job working in outdoor Shakespeare, it was kind of, I had been studying musical theatre, so I suppose the Shakespeare had been there, but it was slightly parked, and got work touring around the UK, and suddenly really kind of realized, wow, it's being outside at night in all of these different gardens and different kinds of outdoor spaces across the country. And coming from Ireland, there were largely spaces I didn't know, and parts of the country I had only lived in London, so there were places I had never been to. And just, yeah, that experience of the words and the nighttime and the different plants and animals and all the different things that they do at night was just like, yes, this kind of felt like a good space, my kind of happy space to be for good theatre. So I became interested in studying that, and I guess, yeah, it led into research. I suppose it's always, I realized it was about the nature as well as the Shakespeare. So it was,
Right.
I was really interested in theatre making and performance and words, that aspect of it, but also really realized that I was really passionate about just being outside more generally. And yeah, so I suppose that brought me, ended up, I didn't plan to do a PhD, but anyway, ended up doing a PhD on Shakespeare and the weather. Learned an awful lot of stuff that I never knew about, kind of around history, and then was led to start thinking about it in the context of contemporary climate change and ecology, and thinking about, well, what is the relationship between the two? And then before I knew it, this was my job, and I was kind of writing that book, and that was what I was teaching. So yeah, it was never a plan to end up here, but it's always been something that I've been really kind of interested in.
That sounds beautiful. No, that's amazing. I get to just sit and enjoy and listen. But that sounds kind of beautifully organic, seeing Footsbarn's Midsummer Night's Dream, which I guess for anyone who hasn't seen Footsbarn, could you just give us a flavour of what their style is compared to maybe a more traditional sat in the dark Shakespeare production?
Sure. Well, I imagine anyone that knows theatre at the Willow Globe probably already has a kind of a grasp of that kind of theatre, but they have lots of clowning, very visual kind of performance, tends not to be in theatres, so in tents or outdoor spaces, lots of circus skills and tricks, and the multiple European languages. So the performers, I think Footsbarn started in Cornwall, I could be wrong, but has since picked up performers from largely around Europe, so that often have lots of acrobatics and clowning. So what they do with the Shakespearean text is that they will present it, but have all kinds of gorgeous clowns alongside it. I'm thinking of a production of the Tempest that they did. It's kind of set on an island with lots of fire and straw. So all of the kinds of things that you would associate with rough and ready kind of outdoor performance, but very magical.
And you mentioned that magic of kind of outdoor open air theatre, and the weather adds a magic. And what is it to you? What is that kind of magic ingredient that taking it outdoors brings?
Yeah, so magic is such a scorned word in academic and scholarly. we don't like the word magic for theatre because it's such a cliche, and that magic of live theatre. But I do think that in outdoor performance, there is something about it that, I mean, however we think about magic, that's really present. It's that combination, that idea, and talking to audiences, I think this came out, do that, and actors who perform in outdoor work, but that the combination, when something works right, whether it's like a collision of a moment in a story or a piece of text or a movement or a mood, when it somehow falls in right with the weather and the light and what's happening, even if that's just for a moment, or even if it's part of a mood or an atmosphere, there is something about that you feel being present at. You're going, well, there's no way that this could happen in this way again. This particular set of circumstances of environment, stage environment, and a human created environment, and there's no way that this very one is going to happen like this again. And I know that that's a truism for all kinds of theatre, and we would say that a play is different every night, and that's perhaps why. That's one of the big appeals of live performance generally, but there's something extra special about it when you think about something happening outdoors, because the elements are completely out of our control. Weather, light, wind, animals, birds, that they're not things that we can control. So when we have moments where they seem to be either working together or just kind of happily coexisting, it can feel, for me, I still find that word magic is good. There's an eco-critic called Robert Watson, and he says that in the early modern period, magic is used as a placeholder for phenomena that biological phenomena without explanation. So magic is a way of kind of going, okay, we just don't know really what it is, but that it is a thing, or that there is something behind it.
Can you say that quote again? That's brilliant.
Yes, I know. It's magic, and I may be paraphrasing now, so we'll need to check it. But he says magic is a placeholder for phenomena without explanation.
Oh, that's brilliant. I'm writing that down.
I will dig out the real quote and send it your way. It's broadly what he's saying, which I really liked.
That describes perfectly, I think, most people's favorite moments when they've been at the Willow or other outdoor theatres where there's that perfectly timed sheep barring, or when the storm arrives just as a character mentions that it's stormy, and that happens a lot more often than it should do, really. But it's brilliant when that happens. It's just something is in harmony that feels massive and beautiful and a phenomenon. It's amazing.
Yeah, that story as well comes out of it a lot. So talking to people since I started doing this project, every time I have mentioned that this is the subject that I am looking at, people will say, oh, I went to see the Tempest, and you'll never guess, but it started to rain. Or I went to see King Lear, and you'll never guess, and it started to rain. Or Hermione descended, she was alive, and the sun burst through the clouds. And I don't know how much, I mean, some of it clearly happens, and then some of it I wonder how we turn it into stories, or how we remember those bits. But yeah, every time I mention it, somebody will have a story, and they always do a little performance of what the weather was like as well. They'll be like, oh, it was really sunny and we all stretched out, or oh, it was really cold, and they do this like their body is kind of remembering how it was to be there. Actors too. Actors are more likely to be able to remember the line. And kind of go, oh, it was like, do you see this? So I can't remember the line, but
you do it where I remember rehearsing for the Globe and thinking, okay, I've got 90 performances of this. One of them, it should rain on this line, and and sometimes it does, and they're the performances you remember because they're so perfect, and you have that bias towards remembering that. But it's magic. It's so perfect. I want to talk a little bit about your research. So, open air theatre is kind of part of the culture. It's so embedded now. When did this begin? When did people start going outside for the theatre? When did they start going inside? What is this period of open air theatre we're living in?
Yeah, gosh, it's such a good question, and I think it's much more complex than the stories that we set up, or at least that's kind of where the research has brought me. So some of the origin stories that we like to have are around like the Greeks performing outdoors, or Shakespeare and the Globe, and we think very much about that as outdoor space, or touring medieval players, those kinds of things. And then we get to today, and we have so many different conflated influences in the kinds of work that we're seeing. One thing that's quite interesting to hear you say is saying, outdoor theatre is so embedded now. And it's just in the COVID situation, it's been quite interesting to note that actually the mainstream media and radio has not been very attentive to outdoor performance, and has been kind of, when it's talking about the challenges faced by the arts, has really focused on the kind of mainstream commercial and subsidized theatres, and hasn't given that much attention. So I think sometimes I think, oh, this is everybody knows about this, and then you start going, oh, they do, but they don't think about it as much. But to get back to the kind of the influences, so the book research that I started, I actually ended up deciding to think about outdoor Shakespeare's today, starting with a company called the Pastoral Players, who set up in 1884 and performed in the few years that followed. Partly because they have histories where that are interesting to contest. But there was a woman called Lady Archibald Campbell, and with her actress friend Eleanor Colquhoun, they were. So Eleanor Colquhoun tells the story that they were out walking in the woods at Coombe in Surrey, the private Crown Woods. And she was an actress playing Rosalind in the theatre at the time, and she writes in her diary that she used to dress in her Rosalind costume to go walking in the woods because they were private and they never saw anyone. So she's out with her friends, these two female friends, dressed in her costume as Rosalind, and she goes, one sunny day the sun was out and it was just so beautiful that I just thought I must just speak Rosalind here. So in the woods, she starts speaking Rosalind to her friend. So in her diary, she describes this kind of this idea of, oh, we must perform Rosalind in the wood, or as you like it, in the woods, because here I am dressed as Rosalind in the woods, and wouldn't it be great? So they set up with Edward Godwin, who often gets most of the credit for this production. So I'm quite interested in drawing out the women's histories. But they set up the Pastoral Players with Godwin and perform As You Like It. And people, the great and the good, including Oscar Wilde, come out from London to see the production. And the first year they do it in 1884. It's beautiful weather, and all the news reviews talk about how amazing it is and how amazing the nature is. And then the second year they do it in 1885, you can read in all the reviews, people are going, well, it was great, but actually it was a bit windy. It was great, but actually it was a bit wet, and it was the spectators were a little bit uncomfortable. So that aesthetic was a very kind of sentimental doing of nature in the woods. It was very, think about it as site specific. They were not trying to emulate early modern the Globe or that kind of bare stage performance aesthetic. They were very much doing something that was trying to be realistic, and this anticipates the Beerbohm Tree, Midsummer Night's Dream, the one that had bunny rabbits in London in the early 1900s. So this is ahead of that, and they're going, okay, we're going to make, and they set up a curtain outside and a seating stand, and they really frame nature within a kind of an outdoor proscenium arch. And all of the people who watch it are going, oh, it's amazing. It could be real. You could just be in Arden. Like, isn't this is here? We're in Arden. And it's a very elite event. People who come, they're members of the aristocracy. They're members of the aesthetic movement, people like Oscar Wilde. So this is not a democratic, community-based kind of experience. It's not about bringing Shakespeare to the people. It's about the great and the good and the wealthy coming to be seen and having this, we mentioned before, this retreat from London into the kind of a clearer, fresher air of the countryside and going back. So that's where I decided to start the book part of this research, because that Victorian aesthetic infiltrates so much of the outdoor Shakespeare, actually not at the Willow Globe, but the way we think and talk about it. If we think about the kinds of work that travels around to the National Trust properties and historic houses, and that aesthetic is as much a part of what's going on, often mixed in with these notions of, oh, it was just like this in Shakespeare's day. So you've got all of these different conflicting influences all there at the same time. I've rambled a bit.
No, that's fascinating, because it feels like it's a new thing, although Shakespeare being new in 1884. Although we associate Shakespeare with being an outdoor thing with the Globe, but that's very much a city thing. They've got their backdrop, which is the back of the Globe, and it's a very specific frame. And thinking of it as a site-specific movement that goes alongside that retreat we were talking about on the phone before the weekend, that it kind of goes alongside that Victorian thing where they have these spa towns and they retreat into the countryside for their constitutionals and that sort of thing. It does feel elite. It feels like a different cultural movement to let's return Shakespeare to its roots, and I'd never realized that.
Yeah, and it's very much there. So when you see the kind of the mixture of things that might happen at an outdoor Shakespeare today, like the fancy bottle of champagne and the picnic, that it has a history that's just slightly different. But nowadays what we get is a conflation of all of these different things kind of that linger. And after the women, after Eleanor Calhoun and Lady Archie Campbell did their work, a man called Sir Philip Barling Ben-Greet, which is such a great title, he went on to popularize outdoor Shakespeare. So often in the histories of open air Shakespeare's in the early 1900s and beyond, these Pastoral Players productions, he gets a lot of the credit in the story as being kind of the kind of setter-upper of this stuff. But Eleanor Calhoun writes a letter to the New York Times saying, Ben Greet says he was the first one to do it, but actually I did this with my friend before. So it's interesting that even then there is a kind of the ways that history happens and who we remember and who we don't. And the women being slightly left out of the story, which just becomes interesting when you get to somewhere like Minack, which is the work of Rowena Cade in the 1930s. Because you're finding actually there are these women who continue to make work outside, and men too as well. But it's just interesting that they're not necessarily in the mainstream and they're out there doing it and making that work.
That's interesting. That is it. So you've got the city theatre culture, which is the establishment, it's the mainstream. You have the fringe, but also that's like a stepping stone. Whereas this feels like a sort of an escape, and these theatres aren't necessarily part of a wider theatrical ecology, but they're their own sort of kind of almost like sanctuaries or hermits, kind of out in the countryside.
Yeah, I like that because I still think that outdoor performance is one of the places nowadays where people can make things happen on their own and often do that kind of sanctuary. And even, I mean, while you might think that while the Pastoral Players is very much the work of kind of elite aristocracy, it is also to women who would not have roles in the mainstream theatre in London at that time at all. And they're just taking the initiative. I mean, yes, they have all kinds of resources, so I don't want to kind of make out like they were, from the rabble and up they came. But they did go, okay. I mean, Eleanor Calhoun is not kind of making work in London. As she's performing, she's acting in other people's theatres. And here, these women, they kind of go, okay, we're going to do it, and we can do it. And the beauty of that kind of persists in spaces like the Willow Globe, like Minack, and smaller groups of people going, here, this green plot, so it's such a cliche, this green plot shall be our stage. Here we go, we can do it. All we need is a bit of a script or a bit of a text, which we have these plays that we continue to be interested in thinking with, and the texts are there. They're hundreds of years old, so we don't have to pay rights to perform them, to explore them. We kind of enjoy spending time with them, and we can do it in any small spot we find. It's an academic called Philip Schwitzer writes. There's a story I think called Puck of Pook's Hill by Rudyard Kipling. And in it, I think these children go out into a wood and they say, if you perform a Midsummer Night's Dream here at just this time, on Midsummer Night, the fairies come alive or something like that.
Right.
And Philip Schwitzer says, of course, the notion of Shakespeare imagining his play happening in a real fairy ring is I mean, it's absurd. He wasn't thinking about that. He was thinking about stages, even if we call them bare, but he was thinking about stages like the Globe. He's not thinking, Shakespeare wasn't thinking about that kind of site-specific performance, although he is thinking about a site. And yet the plays have had such a kind of a power on the imagination that people go, I want to imagine this could be the fairy forest. Like, this could be it. This could be Arden. This is Arden, has such a kind of huge cultural significance for people, especially in the UK. Who doesn't want to be in the forest of Arden?
Completely. So you've got the Globe and Blackfriars and Shakespeare's theatres. They're now sounding quite artificial, and these natural spaces. That's interesting that they were never meant to be in these natural spaces, and yet these plays really feel at home there. And I think most people's kind of favourite Shakespeare productions that they've seen, the likelihood is that they've seen them somewhere magical, like a forest or like an outdoor place or like the Willow, and they feel at home in this place that they were never meant to be. What is it about Shakespeare that brings them to that place and that allows them to fit so well?
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about this for so long, and I still don't. I have lots of kind of thoughts, but not. I don't know exactly. other people will probably have their own thoughts if you ask them. There are things about texts or plays that they love. I think there is something really pleasing in understanding something that comes from the past. And sometimes when you hear the piece of text, the line, whatever it is, in the new space, in the new context, and you go, yeah, I get that. That really makes sense to me now here. And so it's not necessarily, well, for me anyway, it's not thinking that, every single thing in this play is exactly relevant, or that it transcends time. We talk about universality, and for me that is not the case. But there's something absolutely pleasing about the friar. He talks about Juliet and Gossamer or something like that, and you see the Gossamer, you see the bit of the spider web where you are, and you're like, yes, I understand that image because of where I am, or I see the thing differently. Maybe I see the spider's web differently because of the piece of text, or I see the text differently now that I see. Coming to the Willow Globe, for instance, the kind of notions of ivy, or make me a willow cabinet or gates. Yeah. But you suddenly you're sitting there and you're like, yes, I'm looking at the willow and it's making me think of that, and the text is making me think of that in that other way. As you say, these natural spaces, and it's so easy to think of one as very natural and organic, and the other, the kind of the theatre space, as artificial. And yet the landscapes that contemporary performances and historical performances are happening are often entirely artificial. They'll be planted with plants from different eras. Colonialism has a really ugly part to play in the creation of some of the fancy estate gardens. So they have really conflicted histories, and yet the affect of being in them sometimes is like, oh, I'm surrounded by these beautiful plants. There's a line that helps me kind of think about it, where the actress Eleanor Calhoun, in her diary, she says, "We were surrounded by the rhododendrons, and I thought, in such a forest, Shakespeare must have imagined Rosalind." I was like, oh, great. And then you look into rhododendrons, and they were not brought into the UK until the 18th century, I think, to provide ground cover for game hunting and that kind of thing. So Shakespeare would not have seen a rhododendron at all, but she's imagining that he would have, and going, oh, this must have inspired him to think of that. And whereas when you come to the Willow Globe, and Sue and Phil have such wonderful knowledge of the plants. They talk about the moment in The Winter's Tale where the sheep are, it's the ivy, and they're eating the sheep. The sheep don't eat ivy, or they do eat ivy. And Sue has it wonderfully, but is able to pull out that text with respect to Shakespeare's own historical connections to Wales. And again, that's something that you're like, oh, okay, so there is a different kind of a connection between that real landscape and what's in the play. That's a bit of a mumbled response.
No, that's
yes. I think a lot of people will have their own sense of why these plays, and why now, or why here, I suppose is.
There is so much nature written into Shakespeare. There's so many references to really specific plants, which even Shakespeare's contemporary audience wouldn't have understood. A lot of them wouldn't have. There would have been many that probably followed Shakespeare's path from the country into the city, but he's very specific and meticulous with it. And I'm just thinking about that with the rhododendrons. I think maybe we have a broad brushstroke approach to nature now, whereas actually the context that Shakespeare was writing, like at the Willow, with the four gardens of phlegm and melancholy, and those speaking to a very specific context of nature that is lost on us.
Yes, and as you say, written into the texts also, with the plants, the weather references. There's quite a lot of work done on that. But I building on your previous question, I think that also enables the plays to be accessible. Is sometimes not seen as a good word, but I think it is good. It enables us to access them, in that the dramaturgy, the way that the texts are constructed, is to accommodate. They are written for an open air space, and they are written to accommodate real weather. So when Hermia says, belike for want of rain, why is your cheek so pale? And she goes, belike for want of rain. And we see that line now. And if it's not raining, if it's a really hot day, an audience might laugh and go, oh, thank goodness it's not raining. Or if it is lashing rain, it's like, oh no, there's no want of rain. So you get a different kind of a laugh or a different kind of response. But it is a very flexible dramaturgy that is created and constructed with real craft to be able to accommodate a real range of weather. So that's really, I'd love to see a contemporary writer try and do something as that was as accommodating to multiple weathers, and do it with text. You see contemporary site-specific performance sometimes that really does lovely work to accommodate weather, but not I've never seen it. I haven't seen it done with text and with words and with poetry. I would love to see that. I'm sure it exists out there. I just haven't found it.
Yeah. Well, Shakespeare's constantly playing with the reminding us that we're watching a play and saying it's okay that we're all imagining together, or kind of catching us to say, just so you know, we aren't fairies, but you've forgotten that, haven't you? And he kind of gives a wink to say, oh, we've transported you a bit there. And I wonder if that's maybe why we find that ourselves so transported in these natural environments as well, that's so built into the text, the let's pretend element.
And that, yes, you're right. And that we've wanted to pretend, I think, for so long, that we've built up these pictures. And that's when you get these women doing that, or Max Reinhardt later in the 1930s kind of thing. I must have all these trees for a Midsummer Night's Dream. Yeah. It's probably because we have spent, or they have spent, or that time has been spent thinking, as you say, going on these imaginative journeys with the plays, going wink, wink, it's not really happening. But if it was, this is what you would see. And that becomes such a vivid image, that it's that desire to create that image and what would it actually look like if we could see it, and yet we can see it with the words without needing the stuff at all. Yeah. So you put something on the Willow Globe stage or on the Globe stage, and we don't need all the sight. We can see it by hearing it.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit more about weather, because that's you've got a particular interest in weather.
Weather.
So are there things in Shakespeare in terms of how he articulates weather that we've lost? Do you have any particular favorite references to weather that really stands out, or that we don't appreciate that these days, but they had an appreciation?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So Gwilym Jones, who has a Welsh background, writes a book called Shakespeare's Storms, and he thinks through all of the relations to providentialism and so belief in gods, or what do the different storms signify and mean. And actually, have I got your book here? I'm talking about all the books because I love books. Here's your book. Jennifer Hamilton's book, This Contentious Storm, is about King Lear. And she argues is very academic word. I'm like, I don't imagine these people like are arguing, thinking, and just going, oh, maybe. But she is saying that the storm in King Lear is so significant because ultimately it's not. It's not God doing anything specific. It's a storm, and there are all these different kinds of ways that the storm has been read throughout history. So I become super interested then in how audiences take that up throughout history and go, okay, well, what does the fact that we are experiencing this performance in the weather do for how we think that we're experiencing or seeing the show? So like the creation of Arden as this idyllic pastoral scene that then becomes the pastoral is tainted because it was grey and because it was raining. Or you get to Max Reinhardt when he has a Midsummer Night's Dream in Oxford, and it's again the weather is beautiful and people speak about that And then they say, oh, yes, it was too. If the sun is too garish, it's not quite there. So again, this is more connected to what people think they want to, how they think they want to experience it. Regent's Park, which opens in the 1930s, along with Max Reinhardt's big work. This is all giant spectacle happening at this time. But they employ a man called Lord Dunboyne, who is an ex weather forecast or popular weather writer for the Daily Mail, and so he is he studied he had a military career and was given he studied meteorology for a year, but he never kind of gained credibility as a meteorologist. But the Regent's Park Open Air Theatre hired him as the weather prophet. And they say that he has a tent set up at the theatre, which is directly connected to the Air Ministry, which is the military communications for the Met Office. And so Lord Dunboyne speaks to audiences in advance of, how the production is going to be and how it's going to unfold. And audiences then in turn respond with kind of going, oh, well, the true British grit of our audiences meant that despite the fact that it was really wet, we stuck through it and we stayed to the end. So you see that kind of the beginning of performances of how national culture, or senses of how people think about themselves as part of a national culture, mapping onto how they think they are in the weather. And that's very much connected to how they think, how they think, depending on where we're talking, they see or encounter the Shakespeare in that space. So again, as you say, the Tempest comes back again and again. And Gwilym Jones argue. No, that's too tangential. But I suppose for me, that the "Be Like for Want of Rain," the Hermia line, to go back to a specific piece of text, is one of my favorites now to see an audience respond to, because it can be the moment where an audience really relaxes into a performance. So the actor can do something, the contemporary actor can do something. They can deliver the line with real sincerity, or Lysander can look to the sky, they can corpse, they can mug, whatever, in response to that moment in real time. And the audience, the exposition of A Midsummer Night's Dream is very serious. It's usually quite hard hitting. The play usually begins with Aegeus is like, off you go to your death, or to a nunnery. It's all very scary. It's not good news or good stuff. And that line is so often used as a way of going, okay, now we let the audience relax into this. So the audience will recognize the reference to the weather, because whether you that is a reference, I suppose, that is very understandable now. It's not something that requires knowledge of the past. And so people relax into it and go, okay, yeah, we're here with the actors, and we're going to do this together. We're going to do it together for the duration. We're here, and we invest in whatever it is that you're setting up. Wink, wink, nod, nod. And we're here in the weather with you to the end. And let me if I can think of other examples.
Yeah. So it's a beautiful button, like you say, of saying this is going to be fine. You're gonna get this, and the weather being a great leveler. And I'm just thinking about kind of Elizabethan culture being so much about going indoors, in terms of the Royal Arcades popping up. The Globe Theatre is about kind of suddenly having a roof over the posh people's heads, because I think in Peter Ackroyd's book he talks about they suddenly have dyes on their clothes that can't withstand the rain. And so our relationship to weather builds the first theatres properly. And now we're going back out there.
That's really true. And Gabriel Egan talks about that and says, the early modern actors did not necessarily kind of relish or romanticize performing outdoors and in the weather. And as soon as they could, he argues anyway, as soon as they could get inside and into the theatres, they were very keen to do so. Who wants to be performing outside in the cold, wet, miserable weather?
Yeah.
And that is a question that I've been talking with about a colleague today, saying, as we are in this pandemic, and if forms of open air and non-indoor confined theatre space performances are going to be possible over the coming months, years, we don't know what's happening. There's all the speculation. But how will our creative community, how will our performers and theatre makers now respond to the challenge of how can you make work outside, but in the winter for an audience, and what do you do? So we're excited to track and map. You may have ideas as a performer yourself, but we're excited to see what emerges over the winter in this country, because I'm sure, and other countries in fact, but I'm sure our creative communities, they've already been so responsive to what they can do in outdoor space. We've seen Romeo and Juliet at the threshold of people's houses. We've seen dancers in the streets performing for people. So what will emerge over the winter when it's not as, I mean, we might get through the summer with some more kind of conventional but distanced performances, but what do we do in the winter?
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing of how it will, I mean, and we can recognizably see Shakespeare open air, but in terms of new writing, so Shakespeare was writing for a specific theatre that allowed for the weather. So he wrote lines like the one in Midsummer Night's Dream, because he knew what he was writing for. So what happens when new writers are writing for an open air theatre? I'm trying to think of new writing that is specifically for open air. I guess you get knee-high and Footspan.
I would love to see it. I would love to see it. I have not found anything that has the kind of quality of poetry, dramaturgy. I mean, I know we say, how do we have it, of Shakespeare, but I would love to see contemporary performance writing. So much site-specific performance can do wonderful visual things, and I've seen beautiful pieces of dance, but something with a text, a contemporary text that could accommodate and have a dramaturgy that accommodates the weather in such a way I haven't seen. But perhaps some people listening tonight have seen it, and I'd be really keen to be kind of pointed in the direction of anything.
Well, I guess because a lot of our open air culture is, like you were saying before, but kind of centered around stately homes. I guess contemporary writing would lean towards maybe a modern adaptation, not a modern, but a new adaptation of a Jane Austen novel or something like that. That's where the new writing. I was just about to say that.
And that is very much the legacy of the work of the Pastoral Players and those late Victorian outdoor and open air performances. That notion of, so when you pick when a contemporary open air theatre company picks their season, they will go for Emma or the Comedy of Errors or the Pirates of Penzance, rather than thinking perhaps of other early modern playwrights. So you're very rarely going to see Peele or Marlowe, other Shakespeare's contemporaries. You're less likely to see them on the contemporary open air theatre circuit, if we think of it as that kind of in those terms. Much more likely to see Pride and Prejudice or The Importance of Being Earnest or The Wind in the Willows, which yeah, as you say, they all come out of different histories and then they arrive in the same space, which is really interesting. You might see I think it's fascinating. You see a Jane Austen, but done with a kind of somewhat an early modern practice, in that there will be the backdrop will just be what's there, and so the actors are using text to create the story without elaborate built scenery. So in some respects, they're kind of borrowing from early modern theatre practices, and of course, today's actors have such a variety of training that they're drawing on all kinds of things as they make the work, which is really interesting. Somebody should study that.
Yeah. I was just thinking, actually, why hasn't someone put Jerusalem in an open air setting?
They have.
Have they done it? Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the Northcott did it in Exeter, actually, a number of years ago. Now in the Rougemont Gardens, so it's again a garden space in the city centre, and a garden space that has a history of being used for the pastoral type Shakespeare and open air performances. But yes, they did Jerusalem. It's worth looking up some reviews. You can see some pictures with the caravan and that kind of thing. It's a fascinating play because, again, it plays on all of that notion of history and senses of cultural identity that we've got, that kind of linger in work their way through all of this work. in very different ways and manifestations at different times.
Yeah, and for anyone who doesn't know, Jerusalem is Jez Butterworth's play, and it was Mark Rylance's big vehicle 10 years ago. And when I saw it at the Apollo, they kind of did that thing of they made a forest on stage. They brought nature into a West End theatre, which is kind of like what you're saying about the production of real life bunnies. They essentially did, I think they were chickens. They did that.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So for that to then go out into its natural setting makes a lot of sense.
I mean, it's also ecologically dubious, and we start talking about indoors and outdoors and start thinking, well, actually, what is indoor space anyway, and what is outdoors? And you know, these outdoor gardens and homes are so the landscapes are so constructed, and more and more the weather is coming, or the weather and contagion are coming inside into our theatre spaces. So what is inside and outside is a much more blurry and contingent, porous kind of distinction than we might have thought in the past. The willow globe is such a gorgeous example of that, because it's got leaves that grow, so it's never the same at any two moments. You know, the willow rods are growing all the time, so the arches are thickening up, and the way a sound travels through, or a bird travels through, or a person is seen through, is kind of constantly changing. So are we in an indoor or what is a door, indoor or outdoor space? But are we in something or out of something? And thinking more about the continuity of the air and the weather moving through those spaces.
Yeah. Okay.
That does. I was thinking about Jerusalem as you were talking about that, and the Anbierbom tree bringing his, bunny rabbits and his real stream into the theatre, or Max Reinhardt uprooting ancient oaks and bringing them into the theatre, or as you say, then chickens for Jez Butterworth and Jerusalem, or whether it's kind of we go, oh well, we're outdoors now, so we're so much more natural because we put Jerusalem in the Rougemont Gardens. Don't know, maybe some of your watchers will have seen the concert hall in Barcelona, or I don't know if you have, just last week that reopened.
Yeah.
With the plants, so they filled the auditorium for the concert with plants, and the musicians played to the plants, which I thought was really beautiful. And the plant applause sounded like rain or watering. So no human audience there at all.
Yeah.
But again, blurring that distinction: what is nature, what is culture, and it's not really that separation of the two is part of our ecological problems.
Yeah. And that's fascinating, because just thinking we now celebrate the globe reconstruction as kind of their organic oaks. They're amazing. It's natural. It's completely from nature, and yet it is an artificial thing where they've cut down a lot of trees, and there's a lot of kind of manipulation of nature to make that. And maybe in Elizabethan times that would have been seen as a monstrous thing to do to nature, to cut down all those trees to make this vanity project. I don't know.
Vin Nardizzi has a wonderful book that some of your watchers might be interested in. It's Shakespeare's Wood and O, but he writes all about wood in the original Globe and the resources used, and he's brilliant on the references to wood that run through the plays that I wouldn't think of, and the ways in which audiences would have been able to relate those to notions of timber scarcity and deforestation that were happening in early modern England at the time. So and then you talk about the reconstructed Globe, and the significance of that being completely different. But again, you're trying to recreate something, but by yes, as you say, different kinds of trees coming in, and different ways that those references will be read by audiences now. But Vin Nardizzi's book is wonderful. I wholeheartedly recommend, if anybody can find it, the Wood and O, Shakespeare's Wood and O's.
Shakespeare's Wood and O. Let me write this down. Let's we've got 10 minutes left, and I want to talk maybe about the future in terms of nature. So we've obviously got a big prevalent thing here with our virus that is taking over the world, but also we've got climate change. So you've got a particular interest in climate science, and how does that marry up with your work with open air theatre?
Yeah.
Does it marry up?
It's a big question. Yeah. So I suppose sometimes it feels like when we're doing scholarship on theatre and performance that there is this notion that the work that we make is somehow going to be able to fix all of the problems, or that, you know, if we see something enacted, that the arts and culture are the solution, and they are in many respects. I really subscribe to that idea that that the climate problem is a philosophical problem as much as a scientific one, and that it is a culture shift that is needed. And that arts and culture, really capaciously and broadly conceived, can contribute and will be needed to contribute to that. And to that end, scholars like Wendy Ahrens and Theresa May, who think of, they call it eco-dramaturgy, which is theatre and performance making that has ecology at the heart of its performance making intent. So I would be very keen on that kind of work. And then there are also eco-critics like Randall Martin, like Jennifer Hamilton, all of the people that I've mentioned, who look at Shakespeare in his early modern context, and they look at what was going on in ecology and how can we learn about ecology through the plays. So you might think then, okay, well, how do we take some of these early modern plays, Shakespeare's plays, and look at the ecology of them, and what can that do for a contemporary audience? Can it encourage a contemporary audience to think about their relationship to nature, the non-human world, weather, climate, differently? And I think they can. So they can. But I also think sometimes there's a lot of pressure or expectation that that's what the arts do, and sometimes art and culture is equally complicit in making the problem and in upholding the distinction between nature and culture and humans as somehow separate and above the non-human, the natural world. So that clash, I suppose, is at the heart of all of the thinking that we do around what can theatre and performance contribute in this climate world. I think that's why I've always been interested in these contemporary Shakespeare. So these are not really works that are saying we're setting out to change people's relationship to their environment, or they're not really. I mean, there are works that do that, but the works I started looking at are not doing that intentionally, or that's not their express intent, and yet they do have an effect on their audiences that is often to be like, oh, I see or think about this part of nature in a particular way because of many things, but also because of this performance. So yeah, interested in how this kind of theatre and performance can have an effect on the way that people who encounter it and people who make it can think about their relationship to their environment. So there are examples, very good examples, like the organization, for people who might know it, BP or Not BP, which is a brilliant activist organization of Shakespeare lovers. They're largely kind of actors and the people who were very passionate about getting the Royal Shakespeare Company to remove or to let go of their oil sponsorship. So the kinds of works that they've done are kind of riff off the Shakespeare plays, and that kind of sense of their love for Shakespeare comes out of the work that they make. But they're also trying to they're using it for really clear activist purposes, and have been successful. I mean, not by themselves, but as part of a much wider campaign, have contributed to the RSC decision to let go their relationship with BP. So in that regard, the kind of Shakespeare in the open air, which that happens, has a really material and tangible real world change. But then there's also somewhere like the Willow Globe, which is one in like a place that is completely able to see, or who of us is completely able to see, but that is aware of the kind of science, the sense of the future, what is happening on Earth as a result of humans' relationship to nature and the non-human world, and can create a theatre that looks at history, so that is able to look at historical works and what they do and how those works imagined nature, and put that into a space, create a space for local communities, but that are connected and thinking about their place in a wider world, and running that sustainably and finding space for conversations. So these are like some examples of really progressive and kind of, we're always asked to find the hope as theatre makers or humanities scholars. We have to find hope, and but they are examples of really kind of hopeful work that can be done. And then you might also argue that other things happen out there that are not as useful ecologically, but it's nicer to think about the ones that do environmentally generative work.
Yeah, there's something. Thinking about the Willow, you can't ignore nature at the Willow, and that makes you so. I think there's a problem with modern life where in a city, in London, you could ignore nature very easily, and there's lots of places like the Willow, like the Minack, where it's so dominant that you can't forget about it. It's crying out for your attention, and I think that's maybe a very important thing in terms of the narrative, that when we're thinking about climate change, that we are part of a climate. We can't forget that.
The really profound moment for me, I write about this again and again because I found it really profound, but being at All's Well That Ends Well at the Willow Globe, I think it was the first time, or one of my first visits, and it was sunny and it was May, and I'm doing that weather acting with my back. But the leaves were not fully through the arches, so the sun kind of came through my back. And Helena, she's talking to the king. So this is me completely taking the line out of context. But she says, she's saying, "Please let me cure you." So she goes, "My art is not past power, nor you past cure." And I'm like, oh, this is it. Shakespeare, the words might not be passed kind of beyond, or words in general, beyond having the capacity to cause change. And we as a human species who are so flawed might not be past cure. And so for me, it was very much like, yeah, here we are. We're just here. We're sitting. We're part of the sculpture. I mean, we're changing the atmospheric composition of where we are by being here. But the seasons haven't quite changed irrecoverably. So even though they are changing and altering, there is still some spring coming. And we're here, and we're very much, as you say, part of the climate, not kind of separate from or above, and not imagining ourselves in some kind of gorgeous harmony or in control of, but just like we're here and we're in it and we are part of it. And kind of go, okay, what can we do? We have got performance, we have got words, and we've not always been bad at those. We've not always been great at those, but those that we have had sometimes had some power that's worthwhile, and that the effort is worth it, and that it's worth kind of keeping going, and sticking with it in the moment. And yeah, I think that those kinds of spaces do have spaces, material, like actual spaces to be in, and the spaces that are created by the performances have the capacity to create that kind of response. Which is kind of why I keep at it, even though you take the cynicism and the skepticism and go, but there is still something in it that does make it seem worth the effort. Is Shakespeare going to save us all from climate change? Absolutely not. But are there ways that the conversations that we have around this kind of work can be part of something that is helpful? Yes, I think so.
That's amazing. And on that note, that's our hour. On that note of kind of hope, and actually it's worth still going. I think that's a beautiful sentiment of actually it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of work, but it's worth it. I think that's a lovely note to end on. But thank you so much. That was amazing. I could listen and have this conversation for absolutely hours. Thank you. Anything you'd like to say as a
No,
wrap
just
up?
thank you so much for the opportunity to chat about this kind of thing. It's such a strange form to those of us who are all used to meeting and congregating and assembling in real world spaces, especially those of us who find it easier to do that out of doors.
Yeah.
It's so thank you for making it a lovely conversation. And yeah, thank people for listening, and really enjoyed the chance to talk about it and get used to a new form.
Oh, well, thank you. And
Thanks.
hopefully this summer we could be back at the Willow. But
Let's
it's
hope so.
stage 3 of the government plans for theatre reopenings. But if you do want the Willow open and other open air theatres, then make your voice loud and clear. And I'm very confident that there's safe ways of opening up open air theatre across the country. And if you agree, you can write to your MP, you can share stuff on Facebook. The MINAC's been doing some amazing work to kind of fight the fight. That we're ready to go and to give this gift back to the people. But yes, there'll be another Sharing Shakespeare in 2 weeks' time, details of which will be announced very soon. But if in the YouTube comment section you can just finish off with showing your appreciation for the amazing Evelyn O'Malley, who has been fantastic for the last hour. So thank you so much, Evelyn. Thank you. And thank you everyone for watching. I'm going to end the stream now. Goodbye. It's ended.
Yay!
We're done.